Hey there, friends. I hope this video finds you well. I think it's really important for people to understand the potential implications of the global economic impact of the Middle East war. So today, I'm going to talk about the conflict in Iran, which could cause a global financial collapse. I'm not here to cause alarm. I just basically want to talk about the implications. So the US has a powerful military, but its military alone cannot sustain a global empire. So, the economic system and financial structure is what allows this powerful military to exist, and that system revolves around oil. Modern military power is inseparable from the financial and energy systems that support it. So, why does Iran matter so much economically? Well, the key factor isn't just Iran itself, it's where Iran sits geographically. Iran borders the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow shipping lane connecting the Persian Gulf to global markets. Roughly 20% of the world's oil and natural gas trade passes through that strait. So, right now, the conflict has already disrupted shipping and energy infrastructure, which has pushed oil prices sharply higher and created volatility in global markets. If that choke point stays blocked or dangerous, the world immediately feels it, because oil isn't just fuel, it underpins global shipping, agriculture, fertilizers, diesel, aviation, plastics and chemicals, and electricity in many regions. So an oil shock spreads through every sector of the economy. So, in a simplified form, oil equals global economic activity, and economic activity equals tax revenue plus financial markets, and financial markets equal government borrowing, and borrowing equals military spending. So, the United States in particular has historically benefited from something called the petrodollar system, and most global oil trade is priced in US dollars. So, countries therefore need dollar reserves, and those reserves often get invested in US Treasury bonds. And that cycle helps the US finance large deficits and military spending relatively cheaply. So the chain is basically oil trade equals dollar demand equals US debt market and equals military power. So when conflicts threaten major oil routes, markets fear a repeat of historical shocks. And so some examples are the Arab oil embargo in 1973, in which prices quadrupled and the effect was a global recession. And in 1979, we saw the Iranian Revolution, where prices doubled. And in 1990 there was the Gulf War, and we saw a spike in oil prices there, which caused market volatility. So if oil trade becomes unstable and countries accelerate moving away from the dollar in energy trade, that could slowly weaken the financial architecture that has supported US global power since the 1970s. So the place that quietly controls a huge chunk of the modern world's energy flow is the Strait of Hormuz. And once you look at the map, the reason becomes obvious. About 1/5 of the world's oil trade moves through this narrow waterway, and oil from these major producers must pass through it, i.e., Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and Iran, and nearly all their tankers must exist in the Persian Gulf through this one narrow corridor. And at its tightest shipping lane, it's only about 33 kilometres wide, with tanker lanes just a few kilometres each way. That means a handful of mines, a few missile batteries, or attacks on tankers can disrupt the flow. And so geography gives Iran a high advantage. The northern side of the strait is controlled by Iran, and Iran has missile bases, naval drones, fast attack boats, mines, and coastal radar. So much of it is positioned along the Iranian coastline and islands. So even without a traditional navy battle, Iran could make the strait too dangerous for commercial shipping, and that's what strategists call asymmetric control. So for decades, the United States Navy has maintained fleets nearby, largely to keep this passage open, and its regional command is based in Bahrain, headquarters of the US Fifth Fleet. Their core mission is to keep the Strait of Hormuz open to global shipping, because if it closes, the shock is immediate. So what's going to happen if the strait closes? Well, economists model this scenario a lot, and a full closure could cost oil prices jumping $150 to $300 per barrel, which is going to result in massive inflation globally. It's going to cause stock market crashes and recession or depression, and energy markets run on continuous flow. Even short interruptions cause panic. So this is why so much global tension focuses on this exact region. Control of the Strait of Hormuz effectively influences the global oil price, inflation worldwide, shipping routes, military deployments, and financial markets. So basically, if the partnership of oil producing states in the Persian Gulf breaks, then the petrodollar system could collapse. So if the conflict closes the Strait of Hormuz, the issue wouldn't just be currency, it would be supply shock, which could trigger energy shortages, inflation spikes, debt stress, and market panic, which is why the region remains such a focus of global strategy. And the petrodollar system was never written as a formal treaty. It's more like a mutual understanding built over decades, and that makes it powerful but also flexible. Cities such as Dubai or countries like Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and Qatar are critical nodes in the global financial system, and without stability and global trust, investors may withdraw, and the economic consequences would be enormous. Modern global finance runs on confidence as much as resources, and a few places in the Gulf have become key nodes in that network. Dubai has evolved into something much bigger than an oil city. It's essentially a global crossroads for capital and trade, and the key roles are headquarters for multinational firms covering the Middle East, Africa, and South Asia. It's a major aviation hub via the Emirates and a massive logistics gateway, and it carries financial services centred around the Dubai International Financial Centre. If investors suddenly felt the region was unstable, Dubai would likely see capital flight and corporate relocations very quickly. Saudi Arabia sits at the centre of both the energy market and the sovereign investment system, and there are some major factors here, like it's the world's largest oil exporter. Saudi Arabia sits at the centre of both the energy market and sovereign investment system, and it holds massive sovereign wealth funds and public investment funds, and it carries huge infrastructure and development projects tied to Vision 2030. And because so much capital flows through these institutions, stability in Saudi Arabia influences global investment flows and energy pricing simultaneously. And smaller states like Qatar and Bahrain play surprisingly outsized roles. Qatar is one of the world's largest exporters of liquefied and natural gas. They carry a huge sovereign wealth fund. And Qatar and Bahrain, these states connect energy markets and banking, including shipping and military security. So global finance is extremely sensitive to perceived instability. So if investors think that shipping routes may close or war could spread, or energy infrastructure is vulnerable, capitals tend to move very quickly and money flows to what markets consider safe. So this is why even small regional conflicts can trigger global market reactions. So the Gulf has become one of the most capital-dense regions in the world, and massive sovereign wealth funds from all these countries collectively control trillions of dollars in global investments, from tech companies to real estate in London and New York. So instability there wouldn't just affect oil markets, it could ripple through stock markets, sovereign debt markets, global real estate, and infrastructure investments. Iran's strategy is built around what analysts call the axis of resistance, which is a loose coalition of governments and armed groups opposing Israeli, American, and Saudi influence. And Israel views Iran as its primary long-term strategic threat. Under international law, states generally cannot use force against another sovereign state, except in two cases: self-defense or authorization from the United Nations Security Council. So, taking out a foreign head of state outside an active armed conflict would almost certainly violate international law. But it seems to have become normal for states to assassinate rival leaders based on perceived threats, which in my opinion is intentionally creating a very unstable global system. If leaders at the highest level of power are incapable of governing global affairs, then we may end up with what Yuval Harari predicted for the future of global governance: a system controlled solely by artificial intelligence, which will become the ultimate authority. And in many ways, this has already begun.
In 10 years, algorithms and AIs will be running the world. I'm not having in mind some kind of Hollywoodian science fiction scenario of one big computer kind of conquering the world. It's more like a bureaucracy of AIs, that we will have millions of AI bureaucrats everywhere. In the banks, in the government, in businesses, in universities, making more and more decisions about our lives. That everyday decisions, whether to give us a loan, whether to accept us to a job, and we will find it more and more difficult to understand the logic, the rationale, why the algorithm refused to give us a loan, why the algorithm accepted somebody else for the job. And, you could still have democracies with people voting for this president or this prime minister. But if most of the decisions are made by AIs and humans, including the politicians, have difficulty understanding the reason why the AIs are making a particular decision, then power will gradually shift from humanity to these new alien intelligences.